Okay, we're back, and it's COMP1073. It's week 2, lesson 2, part 2 of our winter 2016 semester, and we just, well, for the most part, we just try to fix GitHub problems over the break, and we talked about GitHub at length because most of you have issues with it. I would say most of you. So now I'm thinking I'm more confident that everyone is probably able to operate with GitHub, which is good. And of course, this is going to be the next hurdle that I'm going to ask you to take care of, which is cloud deployment, right? So cloud, how do we do this thing? So when you get access to Azure, and you may not have access now because it takes a few steps. Who actually has access? Who's able to get access? So some of you got access already, right? If you haven't had a chance, please try over the the course of like while I'm doing this, you can certainly pay attention and watch, or you can try and get access. We're going to need some kind of cloud deployment, and really, truly, Azure is the easiest one to use. Okay, so once you have access, everything's good. So when you have access, you're going to go to this address, portal. Try this out, guys, together for people who have access, or you can watch azure.com. Portal azure.com takes you to something that looks like this, right? A login page. And if you have access to into Azure, it's going to ask you to log in with one of your accounts. I have several. I'm just going to use this one. And it recognizes and remembers who I am because that's the way I've set things up. And if it doesn't remember, I'll put in my stuff. It remembers. There it is. Okay, so you're going to get a screen like this. Okay, so there's Azure, right? So it's a dashboard. That's what you're seeing right now. And the dashboard allows you to add in different containers that we can use for our web stuff, right? So remember, whenever we publish a website, it's got to go to a folder somewhere online, right? Now, whether it's a physical folder or a virtual folder on the cloud somewhere, as an example, it's got to have a destination, right? So when we first make, or access our Azure portal, and again, it'll probably look like this for you, you have to click the plus button on the left, all right? If you want to create a new container for your app. So the plus button, it's going to give you several options, and the one we want is web and mobile, right? Web and mobile. And I'll wait for you guys to catch up for people who are with me. So if I click web and mobile, it's going to give me a bunch of different options. Web, mobile, API, blah, blah, blah. All I want is this web app, right? Might give you different options because I'm on a pay-as-you-go, and you guys are Azure Pass if you're using the student features, right? So I'm going to click Web App. And under Web App, on the right, you're going to see several other options here. It's going to ask me for the name of my app. It's got to be unique. And it's going to be unique across all of Azure sites. That means if I make a name and I call it COMP1073, and you make a name, a COMP1073, it's going to clash. It's going to say, I'm sorry, whoever made it first, they have it. And I have to make my name unique. So it's got to be unique across the world, is what I'm saying, all right? Okay, so let's make a unique name. I'm going to call my app the same name that I've been calling it today, which is COMP1073, and we're going to say dash lesson 2, right? Now, my subscription service is pay-as-you-go because I put my credit card in there and I'm to pay. Yours would be Azure Pass. It would be free, right? That's what the difference that you'd see. You might see some other things for resource groups and whatever. You can choose the default resource groups that come up and then click Create. What this does is it's going to deploy everything. It's going to take its time. This is how fast it takes. So this is the process. It's going to create a container, an empty container for my web app, all right? The empty container doesn't have a website, right? It's just empty. So you have to upload to this empty container the files you have on your local machine. But that would be a really weird process, right? If I had to go from my local machine, I have GitHub, I have this, I have that, I have a bunch of different things. Like there's too many locations for all your files, right? Well, Microsoft simplifies it, and you can do a continuous deployment from GitHub. So as long as you have a GitHub account and you give access to Microsoft to have access to your GitHub account, you can go directly from GitHub to Azure. Okay, let's see how that works. So now that you'll get to it when your container is completed, like the creation of your container is completed. This COMP1073 lesson 2 container is what I made. Notice it gives you a URL. So this is the actual official website name now, right? Now it's empty. If I was to go there and check it out, you're going to get something that looks like this. right? The web app has been successfully created, but there's nothing there, right? Because there is no web app, right? Let's go back. So in order for me to put something there, I need to somehow upload it, right? So I'm going to go scroll down on the right here, where you're going to go to Publishing. And under Publishing, there's an option called Deployment Credentials and Continuous Deployment. All I want is continuous deployment. So again, let me show you that. So again, once your app has been created, I scroll down to where it says Publishing. I'm going to go to Continuous Deployment. Click on Continuous Deployment.
So you continue to add to it? What's the difference?
Continuous deployment means whenever I change my GitHub, which is really cool, right? It's not always what we want to do, because imagine if you push to GitHub and it breaks, right? And then your website's broken, right? But typically what we do when we're ready to deploy into a production machine somewhere, like Azure would be your production environment, you push it to GitHub, that repository that's for your production repository, and done, you're deployed directly onto the web. It's nice and easy. All right, but we have to set it up for the first time. So setup is where we're going to have some issues. So continuous deployment. Then you're going to click on Configured Required Settings. All right, now it's asking me where do I want to deploy from? And if you notice that it allows you to take files from a bunch of different kinds of systems. Like, for example, your local Git repository, if you wanted to. I don't recommend that one. OneDrive, Dropbox, Bitbucket. Well, there's the one that I want, GitHub, right? Since that's what we've been doing this morning, right? So click GitHub. And notice that it's going to come up with some other options. Now, if you haven't given authorization for the first time, it's going to ask you, and I'm already here, it's going to ask you to authorize yourself. It's going to say, do you give authorization for Azure to have access to your GitHub? And then you click on, it'll give you some other options to connect with GitHub. And once you agree, you're going to come to a point like this, all right? Now, notice that my authorization, it's me, and then I can always change my account and make it point something else, or change my authorization. Here's my organization, right? And it says that's me. I don't want that organization. I want to choose Georgian, right? Because that's where we are. So Georgian College is what I want. And then it's going to ask me, what's my project, right? So remember, it's COMP1073 Lesson 2. So I'm going to search for that. And there it is, COMP1073 Lesson 2, right? So I want to choose that one. And now it's going to ask me, which branch do you want? Well, I'm only using one branch. Remember I said there's you can have multiple branches, almost like subdirectories for my repository. I don't care about that stuff. I want my master branch. You're always going to have master on here for our session, okay? Click master, and then press OK. And once you've done that, that's it. It's going to go out to GitHub once you've given it access, and it's going to grab the files and see where it says successful deployment. Just said that little message. And you're done, right? Now, it takes a second for it to sync. Notice how right now it's syncing up with GitHub. It's doing its little dance, right? So it's going up to GitHub and fetching stuff from GitHub so that way it can deploy to the web. Okay, so it's going to take a second for it to do that. And when it's done your continuous deployment, then I should be able to go back. I'm going to let that cycle for a second. I should be able to go back here, and if I open it up in a new folder, like a new browser, I should see this. So now I'm deployed live on GitHub, on Azure. So check it out. You go there and check out if you can see this. COMP1073, Lesson 2, AzureWebsites.net. It's a live site it's ready to go. It's live everywhere in the world right now. Go ahead. Check it out. And this is what I want you to do for all your assignments. All your assignments are going to be live, right? Whenever you do one. So it's a real world application. So if you go to an interview and say, have you ever done a continuous deployment? You can say, absolutely, yes I have, right? When you're a web developer, the new way we do web development is like this. We typically do not use FTP, right? If you're going to use FTP for some legacy sites that are out there because they're not on the cloud, that's okay. And then that's a very simple process. And you've learned that before, most likely in your intro to web, or your web and internet fundamentals class that you would have had, right? Where you kind of can connect to your FTP with FileZilla or something like that. You can also do that here with Azure, but it makes no sense. Why would I do that? Why would I have my separate files, separate on my local server and separate on GitHub, and too many files, too many locations, too much trouble. So continuous deployment is the new way we do things right from GitHub or from some kind of revision control system right into our cloud provider. That's how we do it. All right, so notice how it shows me my initial commit. Now, you probably don't believe me that it automatically does it, right? So I'll prove it to you, right? So let's go back into Visual Studio Code, and I'm gonna make a change to this code because this is the stuff we're gonna be talking about today, right? Notice how in my scripts folder, my app.js, there's nothing, right? So I'm gonna add some stuff into my app.js because we're talking about JavaScript. This is what this class is about, but we've been fooling around with setup, which is fine. So I want to do like a console.log, right? So remember, a console.log, what it does is it sends some information to the console. So I can say, you know, my app started, right? My app started. And I don't have to, as long as I've attached my app.js, right, as an example, into my index.html, which I have right here. Remember what, just to recap, what the browser does is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all interpreted languages. So the browser, which is our interpreter, that's what's going to interpret and render to the web. It's going to go through line by line into each of your pages when they're brought up, when they're called up. So they go to index.html. I'm going to go to the first line, second line. I'm going to read them in and execute them, okay, one at a time, just like I would in any other program, right? When I get down to lines that link stuff in, like this, it's like physically having this file sitting inside of my my index.html document. You don't see it there, but you can think of it as it's physically in there. You have access to everything that's in that file, all right, as if it was the same file. We broke it out into separate files because it's easier for us to manage instead of having it all in one file. And it's far better to compartmentalize our view. Remember we talked about progressive enhancement, and I'm going to ask you a question about that on your test, right? And now it's going to have to be next week because we spent all this time doing configuration, right? So progressive enhancement says, if you read our first three PowerPoints that I put up there last week, it says that we want to separate concerns. I want to separate my view from my logic, right? So my behavior is my JavaScript, my view or my structure is my HTML, and my presentation is my CSS, and I want to separate those three pieces up so that way I can control those pieces, have more control over those pieces, right? So that's what we're doing here. That's why we have them in separate files. So this is all of our CSS files. Notice we have one that's local in my content folder, and now my content folder shows that my app.css is just showing custom styles, right? So if I go back to my index.html, that's there, app.css. Okay, cool. So it keeps reading. It's my body tag. It reads my header tag. It provides a home link. I go down to some additional, it's my paragraph tag here. In my paragraph element, which is this whole thing, I have some text and so on. And then it finally goes to my JavaScript section, and it reads these in. It reads my jQuery library in, which I don't use right now, and my Bootstrap library, which enables Bootstrap to work, my CSS framework, right? And then finally at the bottom, it gets to my app.js, and all it does is it reads in everything that's in app.js. And in app.js, the only thing I have in there is this one line, console.log, which now the editor, our HTML browser, knows, whether it's Google or Chrome or Firefox or whatever, it knows to execute this line, console.log. So it's going to show this app started in the console. Now, it won't show up on your main page because the console is in the developer tools. So I've made a change, and I want to show you that this change now exists. If I go to the actual Chrome right now, and if I go right-click and I say inspect, I can find my console and notice that there's nothing in the console right now because I have nothing pumping anything out to the console, right? Like console.log. So I'm going to make that change here, right? Here's my Visual Studio Code. So now I've got to go back into my, and again, there's many ways to do this. If I did it through Visual Studio Code, I can go to here, my GitHub icon, and notice that there's a change. I can click on changes and add the plus, which adds all my changes to the staging area in GitHub. And then I've got to go and put a commit message. So for example, updated or added, I don't know, console command to app.js, which is what I did, right? And then click on the check mark. And once I've done that now, because I've linked my COMP1073 lesson 2 to GitHub, and I've done that through the command line, if I click the ellipses, I have other options. I have a push option that I can do. So I never have to do the command line again, really. And if I click push, right, it'll go there, connect with my remote repository, and push everything. Okay, now that I see that little mark is gone, so there's nothing else to push, Well, is it updated? Let's take a look. So if I go back to Chrome, and here's my site, and I just updated. So let's see how fast it's done. Let's see if I refresh. Okay, I don't know. And then let me see my inspect, and let's go to my console, and yeah, it's there instantly, right? So now you have a live view, real life, of what's happening with my website. This is, you all can see what I'm doing. Whatever I have, you have, right? And this is what we want to do. When we run in a production environment, I want to upload to GitHub, continuous deployment, right from GitHub to Azure or whatever other cloud service. They all do it, by the way. All of them have the ability for you to push and do continuous deployments. And we're good to go. We're ready to go with our app.js and do more work on JavaScript. Okay, so any questions around Azure and continuous deployment at this stage, right? Now, if you don't have access and you've never done it before, you're not going to have any questions. You're going to have questions when you fail to do it by yourself or you have problems at home, right? So I'm going to expect next week we're going to do the same dance. You're going to come in and you're going to have access to Azure. Please get access to Azure. If you don't have no access to Azure next week, I cannot help you. You have to have access to Azure on your own. Yes?
If we want to connect Azure with GitHub with our project, how
A new project?
Yes.
You can disconnect your deployment right now, right? Like if I go to Azure, there's some deployment options. And if you notice here, I can say, from a deployment perspective, see how up here you have disconnect? I can disconnect this GitHub deployment, this GitHub repo, and connect it to something else.
So we cannot connect with two boards.
No, you wouldn't be able to. You only have one source for all your files, right? Yeah.
We both get to the same point once it's the select and offer, like pay as you go for each file. Like we're in
Azure
Microsoft
Pass.
Azure.
Yeah, Azure Pass is what you should select, right? That's the one that it should be given, yeah.
Like, we click on featured apps, so we're in web app. And get a subscription.
Yeah, see that, so that means that, are you logged in with Georgian or are you logged in with your Microsoft account? That's where the problem is. You have to log in with your Microsoft account. If you don't log in with your Microsoft account, you'll get that option, right? You have to, after you basically do, there's two steps for Azure. One step is, hey, Azure, I confirm that I'm a student or teacher. Number one, yes, you're confirmed, good. Now Azure, thank you for confirming me. Now I want to set up my Azure account and I need a Microsoft account to do that, right? So I need to have an Outlook account, an Outlook.com or Hotmail.com or some kind of, or Live, one of those Microsoft accounts. And then you use that one for your credentials to log into Azure, right? And to set yourself up. If you set yourself up with your Georgian college, it will not work, right? You have to set it up with a Microsoft account.
No, you're right. Yeah, it works there.
Okay.
Different setup.
That's what it is. And if you're logged in already with Georgian, you have, sometimes we have to go into another browser, like, yeah, I know, it's kind of weird. But it's only for the first time. Once you've done it the first time, again, from a setup perspective, you're good to go. As long as you got access to Azure, we can fix you. No, you're signed up, but you need to sign in with your Microsoft account. Okay. All right. So now, well, credit card's okay. It's not going to take anything from you unless you're doing something there, right?
It's a problem, Tom, because I'm gonna get, you know, I did use this phone and I want to keep it for business, and now it's texted me and I get all this crap from Microsoft.
No, you won't. Unless you say no, you won't. You can opt out of all that stuff.
I didn't check it, but I guarantee you.
Okay, I just got to move on. So now we've done this to continuous deployment. I'm going to talk about JavaScript now for the last 45 minutes. All right. Let's talk about this a little bit. So we talked last week about how it executes on the command line. Let's talk about a couple of them. I'm just going to minimize this thing. So we've got this one command, and I also talked about how we can add variables, right? Just as a review. So let's add a variable in here. Remember, as in any other language, variables hold or store our data, right? So if I do something like this, in order for me to set up a variable with JavaScript, I got to use the var keyword, right? And I'm going to kind of declare my variable as my variable. And again, remember I use camel case. Camel case means the first word in my variable name is lowercase, and the second word is uppercase, right? And then I can assign a value to my variable. Like for example, I can make it, I can ask, Tom, where I can put my name in there, or I can put in some other value in there. And the thing with JavaScript that makes people crazy, like I said last time, is it's loosely typed. Yes? Yes. I'll make the font bigger. In order for you to do that with code, you've got to go into preferences. And if I go into user settings, or I think it's workspace settings, there it is. Here's my font size. And my font size is 16. I'll make it 20. How about that? Just to make you happy. And then I'll save. Now it's bigger. Is that bigger? Better for you? Yeah. Okay. So let's just kill this stuff here, and we'll go into app.js now. All right, so this is my console log and my variable. Now remember, my variable doesn't have a type. My variable, what if I hover over it with Visual Studio? It says type any. And remember, what are the 4 or 5 types that exist with JavaScript? What are they? I'm going to ask you this next week. No float. You got a string, right? Yeah.
Number, object.
Almost. Remember Boolean object. How about null? How about undefined? Those are all values that you can have. You can have them. Those are all not just not values. They're actual types, right? Yeah. So definitely an object would be one. And the most typical ones are any. That's one. Any is actually a type, right? Boolean, number. There's no float. And string. Those are the main ones we're going to see all the time. And there's others, right? But those main ones, right, are the types that we have in are the simple data types that we have in JavaScript. We also have more complex data types like array, or we have a data type like that, okay? But arrays in JavaScript, just to let you guys know, are not just arrays like we normally know them in other languages. They're array lists. They have other properties than just a regular array. So it's like an array and an array list. And who knows what an array list is from C# or Java? Some people know. An array list is basically, it gives you additional methods attached to it. So you can actually add other things. You can use other things on the array. And you can use commands like push and pop and those kind of commands with an array. And you can't do that with an array typically in other languages. So again, an array in JavaScript is like an array list, and we're going to see that functionality. Okay, so but now we have this variable, and I can't really type it. I can't say, well, my variable is equal to a number, or my variable, whatever. Once I assign my variable, it automatically uses it as a type, and it says, it uses something called type inference to kind of understand what type this variable is, right? And I can always change it, which is kind of funky too, which is bad from a programming perspective, right? But or it's dangerous, let's say. So let's say an example, my variable could be, I could assign a number of 1. I can use the assignment operator. The equal sign is the assignment operator. And I could use this literal, which is a number literal, which is 1, and I can assign 1 to my variable. Now when I hover over my variable, notice how it moved from any to number, right? It's a number type, right? Okay, cool. What about if I go down here underneath my variable and I assign it? Can I do this? My variable is equal to Tom. Right? Can I do that now? Right? Remember, we're just talking in JavaScript. Well, it says if I hover over it, it's giving me a little underline that says, hey, this type string is not assignable to type number. It'll complain in Visual Studio. It gives you some hints that says something's wrong here, right? But it won't fail. It won't fail. It'll fail silently, right? Which is, what was that? It's loosely typed, so it doesn't care. JavaScript, you can assign whatever type you want, which is really bad, right? This is a really bad form. So please, whenever you have an R course that we're doing, let's use one variable, one type, right? Because that's the way we should do it. To help us with that, when we program in JavaScript, strict JavaScript, we can use something called use strict. So at the top of your JavaScript file, you can put a command, use strict. Right? And what use strict does is it stops us. It gives errors on the command line saying something's wrong with your code. You shouldn't be able to do this kind of stuff, right? So please use strict every time we do any kind of JavaScript together. It's going to give you additional complaints, right, on the command line, which we want. We want JavaScript to complain if something goes wrong, right? Because if it doesn't complain, we can't troubleshoot our problem, right? And as we get towards the end of the course, if we have time and if we get to it, I'd like to try and talk to you about another way we can do that with a whole other superset of JavaScript called TypeScript, which will make you into like JavaScript superheroes, okay? But we can't get there until way later, all right? Like way later in the course, like near the end.
JavaScript recognizes that as
Yes.
even though it's a string.
Yes. It's a special pre-compiler option that you can put in, right? So what you do is when the browser sees use strict in quotations on its own line, it knows that you're switching to strict mode. Okay, it's the only time you're going to see this kind of stuff. It's like a weird quirk in JavaScript. Yeah.
It's case sensitive either way, right? Strict or not.
It always is case sensitive. Yeah. Yeah, but use strict. It's not the case sensitive thing. It just makes it so that it'll error out on the command. When you actually run it, it'll give you some more errors, right? Which is good. We want errors when we make a mistake. Okay, so that's one thing you know about JavaScript. JavaScript is loosely typed. It's also case sensitive. And again, if I do this again from a scope perspective, we talked scope last week a little bit, right? My scope for my variable, this thing called my variable. Remember, my variable is a container. It's a storage container right now, right? The scope is the global scope because it's written here like this, right? I haven't compartmentalized it inside of some kind of closure like a function, right? So in order for me to make it local to the function, I have to wrap a function around it, okay? Now, you've seen functions before in other languages, like, for example, in C# or in Java, right? Have you guys done any other languages at all? C#, Java, PHP, anything? Yes? If you haven't, we have a structure that we use we can call, which is called a function. We can call this function, and the actual function itself, what it does is it creates almost like a code block that I can call up over and over again. I can reuse my code block that's inside the function, that's a named area that I can use over and over again. We're going to talk about that later on. But for now, this is the global scope. So when we declare a variable here on the root of my JavaScript file, it's the global scope, which means it's available anywhere in my document and anywhere in my application. And this is good and bad. It's good because I can use it. It's bad because I have to watch that I don't redeclare my variable somewhere else, right? Because otherwise it'll clash. Okay, if I use it one place and redeclare it somewhere else, it'll mess my variable storage up, right? We don't want to do that. Especially if I'm sharing files. If I grab a library from another source and I don't know what variable names they use, right? And if they also use the global scope, then my variable names and their variable names may clash, which is why we don't want to do that. Okay, but anyways, for now we have this. So I want to show one of these variables inside my console log. And the way to do that, of course, is you can use the variable name and the plus operator. So let's try this out. So we'll say my variable, right? We'll make a space, plus, right? And then space. So we have a space between my variable value, right? And the string literal, right? And it's going to concatenate these. It's going to smash these two things together. The plus operator, what it does is it takes the string and it takes the number, smashes them together, and makes both of them a string, right? So the number translates into a string or is converted into a string, right? Which can cause us some issues if you're not careful. Now, remember, what are we going to get here? What do you think we're going to get in the output if I do this? My variable plus app started. Tom space app started. You won't get 1 because we've redeclared the value for our variable, even though it's complaining. Let's see if we get any kind of errors in the command line if I've done this. So I'm going to save this thing and I'm going to run it. I'm going to run it locally here. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to open it up in reveal in Finder or on your Windows systems. It'll be revealing in Explorer. And if I double click on my index.html here, this is local, right? It's going to show me this. And if I right click and go to inspect on the back end, right, I have Tom app started. Notice that it failed. It didn't fail anything. It just did what it asked to do, whether I redeclared it or not. It failed here. It told me, it gave me this warning here, even with using strict, right? It gave me a warning, but it's still executed. So this is bad, right? And what I want to try and do is kind of, there's a couple of conventions we can use. Sometimes what people do is they use my variable and they might say something like this. If I have a number or some kind of value like my variable, make it more descriptive. My variable doesn't really mean anything, right? Let's call it something else. Like, for example, my name. That might be more a valid identifier. So we'll say my name, right? Well, my name, a name probably is a string. You could even go as far as put again, my name string. That might be something to tell you what it is, right? You can name it like this as well. That's going a little bit too far from a JavaScript convention perspective, but people do it. And the reason why is because this way it identifies to the user, right, that it's a string, right? Even though you can still assign a number to it and it wouldn't complain. FYI, right? There is no typing here. It's just, you use it as you go. Here's a question for you, and I want to ask this question of all you guys and girls. If I leave the semicolon out, Will it execute? Who says no? No. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I see yeses and nos. The answer is yes. It will execute, right? That's another problem, right? So I'm just telling you. So JavaScript, it's like says, you know what? Semicolons are kind of optional, right? You want to use semicolon, you can use semicolon. If you don't want to use a semicolon, that's okay, right? That's a problem. Why? Because if I put two commands, right, or if I don't, JavaScript is going to try to interpret what you're doing here, right? So if it sees variable myString on the same line, like this right here, see, look, there's no semicolon here, right? And normally in other languages it would scream, it would go, you know, Tom, what are you doing? It's a syntax error, right? Not so in JavaScript. Let's try this out and see what happens. So I'm going to save it, and I'm going to go back to my Chrome here and refresh, and then, oh, what's happening here? And it says this. It says anonymous function app.js, and it says my variable is not defined. Why? I'm using useStrict. Because I put useStrict on, it does that. Let's take useStrict off and see what happens. So I'll take useStrict away and try it again. Oh, wait. Let me go back. Sorry, I made a mistake. The reason why it's not finding my variable because it doesn't exist. I meant to do this, right? My name string, right? Let's try this now. Sorry, let's try this now, and let's see what happens. Refresh. Hey, undefined app started. How come it's undefined? Because if I go back up here, if I go back to here, my name string, well, I haven't added a value to it, right? It doesn't know that it's Tom, right? I haven't assigned anything, so let's assign something. Tom. Right, and no semicolon. Okay, save, and let's try it again, and refresh. Oh, Tom app started, right? If I want to be more specific and be more realistic with how I would say this thing, maybe what I want to do is Tom apostrophe S, Tom's app started, right? S. Now, it wouldn't work for all names, but for me, yes. And let's see how this would work. So I'll go back to Chrome and refresh. Tom's app started, right? So, but I didn't use a semicolon, and even though I got useStrict, it doesn't care, right? So, do you need semicolons? They're optional. Should you use semicolons? Absolutely, because it makes it more understandable for the interpreter. It's going to go through your lines, and if something goes wrong, it's because you forgot to add a semicolon or something like that. That's on you, right? So please add semicolons at the end of every line. That's just part of the stuff. The semicolon terminates the execution, the line of execution, okay? So that's kind of required for us in JavaScript, right? Okay, cool. So we have numbers and whatever, and so we've done strings. We can also do conditionals, just like we've seen before. And who knows what a conditional statement is? Anybody? This is like basic programming 101.
Yeah.
No. If, right? And who has not ever done an if statement in their life? Anybody? That's okay. If you've never done an if statement in your life, no, thank you for that. Thank you for that, though. I appreciate the hand. If you haven't done an if statement in your life, it's just going to prompt me to tell you how to do it. So let's say, for example, I also want to have my age. So var my age, right? And let's say my age is 30, right? I'm putting it in there. It's not true. Well, let's just say my age is 30, right? Because I like to be 30 forever, right? But it's just, you know, wouldn't it be nice? But anyway, so my age is 30, right? And I want to say that. I want to say, so console, log, my name string, Tom's app started, and then made another console.log, and we'll say something like this. We'll say, my name, so my name string, right? And then plus, which is the operator, the addition operator. We're going to add in a space, so Tom space is space, and then the age, right, which would be plus my age, right? So we're going to use, my age. There we go. And then I'll put the semicolons back, because it just kills me not to use semicolons. So what this is doing is saying, well, here's my age, it's 30, and then print this out, right? So let's try this out. So both my Tom and my age, these two variable names should show on the command line. If I refresh, there it is. Tom's app started. Tom is 30, right?
Basically, if you don't use semicolon, you just put the statements in different lines.
Yes, but you'd never not use semicolon. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it would work. If you put them on the same line, it would fail, right? It would just don't know what to do, or give you some weird errors.
The space you've got a space before and after is, and that's the space.
Yes, the space. So anything you put in the quotations, including spaces, is part of the string. Strings can have the string literal can represent numbers, letters, symbols, spaces. you can add all that stuff in your string literal. All right, so it can be a combination of all that stuff. Okay, cool. So some simple things, right? And this is sending it to the console. It says go to the console and log this, anything that's inside of this, these parentheses here. In fact, if anything, what I'm really doing is using a function, right? So the log method or function is part of the console object, right? That's what is happening. So if you notice, if I hover over console, it says console. It's a type of console object, right? Okay, cool. Now I want to do a conditional. Well, if my age is 30, then maybe I should say, I'm young and strong. And if my age is, over 35, let's say I'm old and weak. Let's just say, right?
Old and smart.
Old and smart. How about that? Old, I like that. Oh, wise. Why is it smart, right? Let me see. All right. So yes. So if let's just try this out. So I've got my age, right? And then let's go in here and say, well, here's my if statement, right? I can put my if statement. If right is greater than, let's say, I don't know, let's say 40. How about that? Greater than 40. And then, and you want to put this in quotations, although JavaScript will accept no braces here, and it'll just execute the next line. It's a bad practice. So please don't do this. Don't do next line and then something like console.log right here. You could, right? Doesn't mean that you should. Console.log. And you can put something like, you are old and wise, right? That's to say. You could do that, right? But it's only if my age is greater than 40, right? Now, it won't show up now because my age says 30, right? So it's going to fail. It's going to go through and say, well, my age, which resolves to 30, right? Is it greater than 40? No? Okay, then skip this line. If it is greater than 40, then execute this line. This is bad. And this is bad because if you notice that we have, what if I put another line in here? This is the problem with this thing. If I go console.log, this will always execute, right? It looks like, because I put them in line like this, that both of these are gonna execute if my age is 40, but it's not true. Only the first line will. So we never ever do it like this. We always do with braces, and I'll show you the difference between both. So if I do with braces, like this, I'm not going to see anything right now because my age is 30, right? So let's try this out. So I'm going to save it. And inside the braces, this is called the code block. So inside this code block, the only thing that it'll execute both of these lines if this condition is true. Okay, that's what's going to happen. So let's try this out. So I go back to here, to Chrome, and I refresh, and I see nothing, right? Which I should see nothing. Now let's change my age from 30. Let's change it to something else, right? Let's go back here, and let's change this to, sure, 41. I like that number too, right? It was only true. It was only true. And then, now that I've changed my age, my number to 41, now this condition is satisfied, so therefore both of these lines should run, right? Let's check this out and check and see if it's true. So refresh, and now you are old and wise, and this will always execute. Well, that's because it's inside of these curly braces, which is part of my code block, right? Well, what if we take the curly braces away? Let's see what happens. So let's take the curly braces away, and we'll just take them away, and it'll still work this way, by the way. But it's an illusion the way I've set things up. I've written it this way, but really what's happening is this whole thing is one line, and this is another line, the way without the curly braces. That's how JavaScript interprets it. So that's dangerous. That's why we never put it like this. We always use curly braces. Okay, let's check this out. Now I'm going to go back to 30 again to show you what I'm talking about, and it should fail, right? So my age is greater than 40 is false, so therefore it won't do this. And if you've written it like this, you might even think that this isn't going to execute, but actually it will. Let's run it and see what happens. Correct, because they're two separate things. Without the curly braces, they're two separate executable lines of code, right? With the curly braces, these two things become a code block, and they execute together, okay? Let's check that out and see if it happens. So I refresh, and then, this will always execute, but I don't get you are old and wise because this condition isn't satisfied, which is only these two lines. So that's why the semicolons are really super important, because the semicolons separate our lines of execution, A, and you know, and B, it's kind of ugly to not have it in there. If you're a programmer, you'd understand that it's bad. So we always want to use curly braces. Curly braces are you know, something we want to kind of use to indicate to JavaScript that anything that's inside the curly braces is a code block. And if the curly braces immediately follow a conditional statement like this, it says, hey, if this conditional statement is true, then execute this code block. That's what it means, right? Execute anything that comes after. All right, let's get rid of this line because that's not always going to execute anymore, right? What about if it's not true? So if I'm not 40, it's not greater than 40, and somehow I'm less than 40, right? You know, that's okay. And remember, it's greater than 40. That means if I'm 39, it will fail, right? If I'm 40, it's going to fail. It's greater than 40. If I wanted to make it so it's 40 or above, I can use greater than or equal to, right? So it's greater than or equal to. That's how you read that. Greater than or equal to 40, then this will execute, right? Let's leave it at greater than 40. So else, if I put an else statement directly underneath this one, what else means is this. It's part of the same statement. My if statement and my else statement kind of go together, right? So you read it like this. If this condition is true, then execute this line. And else, if this condition is not true, then do something in here. And what I'm going to do in here is, well, you're young and strong, right? Well, that's what we said. Yeah, no, that's not. You are young and strong, right? There we go. So that's what's going to happen. So now, if you notice, these two conditions are mutually exclusive. You can only be one or the other, but not both, because it's if this or this, not both. Can't do it. It's if or else, right? That's a conditional statement. All right, so let's try this out now. So now I'm still 30. It's going to say, well, this is how it should be. Let's run this through. We're going to say, well, if 30 is greater than 40, well, that's not true. So then it's going to run this one. You are young and strong, right? That's what we expect to do. Let's go back here and refresh. You are young and strong, right? Tom is 30. You're young and strong. No problem. Okay. And let's go back there and change this to another number. Let's change it to 40, right? Remember we said 40 still fails, right? 40 still fails because 40 is not greater than 40, right? If my age is greater than 40, well, my age is 40, and it's not greater than 40, it's less than 40, or equal to 40, sorry, right? So because it's equal to 40, this condition still fails, and I'm still going to get your young and strong, right? See? However, if I leave everything the same, but change this from a greater than to a greater than or equal to, and press save, and run it, now it's going to execute and say, you are old and wise, right? Because it's greater than or equal to. So conditional statements allow us to give almost like to produce different kinds of results depending on our data, right? If the data is one value, we can produce some kind one type of result. If the data is another value, we can produce another kind of results. That's what conditional statements do. And conditional statements are kind of the heart, if you will, of programming, right? Without conditional statements, it's almost like you just run everything in sequence, right? And we never run things just in one sequence. We always kind of have some kind of conditional that we go through. Otherwise, why bother? Okay, so this is some conditional statements here and whatever. And this is kind of cool. And what about if you have more than one condition? You have, you might satisfy other conditions. Well, if I put in another if somewhere down here, I mean, I can put as many if statements as I want. If, my name string, here, let's try this. My name string is equal to double equal for equal to. If you put a single equal, it's assignment. You never want to do double single equal, right? A double equal says if my name string is equal to Tom, right? Specifically checking for Tom, then, right? What do I want to say? The then is the curly braces in my mind, right? Then console.log hello Tom, right? And then hello Tom, right? We can also put hello name string. It'll be the same thing. If it's equal to Tom. Here's what this is doing, actually. It's saying, hey, compare my name string, which is a string, to Tom. And if they match, then do the next thing. However, don't be fooled by the double equal. What we really want to use in JavaScript these days is some new thing that you've never seen before, a triple equal, right? And the triple equal says, if it's absolutely equal to Tom, then execute this statement. We always want to use the triple equal over the double equal because the double equal is truth-C or false-C, and the triple equal is absolutely true. It's absolutely this absolute result here that you're looking for in this particular format, right? And an example of that is if I'm comparing numbers, right? So if I can have my name string, let's say I have I'll make another thing, var my age string, okay? So my age string, I can also put in an age of 40, correct? Now, here's a question for you. And if I compare my age string to my age, right? And let's try this down here. If I said if my age, right, is equal to, double equal to, my age string, right? Then, now it's showing me there's a problem, right? But I can still do it, right? If my age is equal to my age string, then say, you know, something like, you know, we'll kind of put in there, hello problem, right? Because that's a problem if we can do this, right? Because I'm comparing a string literal to a numeric literal, and that should be false, right? Let's see what happens with JavaScript, right? So I'm going to run this thing. I'm going to go back to the browser and refresh, and it says, hello problem, right? Because what we're doing is, and I'm just going to say this to you guys so you understand, when I do this comparison, it's true because the quotations or the number gets converted during my comparison, right? Now you're getting a weird thing going on, right? Where it'll work, but you don't want this thing ever to work. You want this never to work, right? This is wrong, right? So the way to fix that is if with a triple equals, right? This says if my age is absolutely equal to my age string, it has to be the same type and the same data, right? Then you can do this, right? Now it's going to show no problem, right? Because there wouldn't be anything like this. And else, we can put an else statement in there saying, and again, I usually put it on the next line, else, you know, console.log, and then there's no problem, right? Let's try this out, right? So I'm going to go back here and refresh, and now there's no problem anymore, right? Because this will fail with triple equals. So whenever you see triple equals, and online you'll see double equals and triple equals. Double equals, it's okay to compare double equals. If you're really strict with your coding, it's good. If you're not sure, and if you want to be absolutely true, you want it to fail 100% if it's not the right value, triple equals. And we use triple equals more often now than not. Okay, that's the way to go. Yes, you have a question?
Yeah, what if you, I have a question.
Yeah.
What if you set it, my age equal to my age string, and then you count the log of that variable?
So say that again.
So what if you set if my age is equal, like you use the assignment equals off?
In here, if my age equals?
Yeah.
Oh, it'll always be true.
It will,
Yeah, so if I go one of these,
but then you count the log one of the variables. What variable?
doesn't matter. My age is always going to be now equal to my age string. When I do this, I'm assigning. I'm saying, take the value of my age string and put it into my age. And you know what? And then if I do an if statement, it's always going to be true because now it's true. Yeah, you assigned it. So it's always going to give you a true answer, right? Yes?
The question is like when I'm like comparing like my age is triple equals to my age string, it's showing an unexpected error.
That's good. That's should. It should. Unexpected error is a good thing. If you're doing, that's good. That's well, it's got an underline, right? This underline is showing what this is, and this is what you should be seeing at the bare minimum. It's wrong, right? And actually, this assignment statement inside my if statement, that's wrong. We should never do an assignment inside an if, or else it's always going to be true, and it's always going to say hello problem. Let's try this out and see what I'm talking about, right? So if I do this, it's going to say hello problem, right? Because it's a problem, right? Here it is, right? It's always going to be true that if I assign one thing to the other. If I assign thing, so did you assign thing to the other? Yes, you did. Okay, it's true. That's what you're saying, right?
But with a double, it's like it has to be the same type, or
It has to be the same type and the same value.
and it's, you know,
Yes, those are the things. So it's more. That's why it's stricter to use triple equal, right? Double equal, it means if it's the same type, if it's a different type but the same value, it'll
so
pass.
your value can different, you can use it, and that is still.
As long as you have, if it's a string and if it's a number and it's the same value at the end, if it evaluates the same when you convert one or the other, it'll pass, right? Which is bad. That's really bad, right? We don't want that to happen. We want it to fail when it's a string and a number, right? Yeah, I'm just saying JavaScript. These are JavaScript nuances and little idiosyncrasies that programmers hate. Like I'm sure like Andrew's like jumping out of her skin right now when she sees this stuff. She's like, oh my God, right? How come this is happening, right? Because me too. I hate it. It just drives me crazy, right? So I always like to use the triple equals or at least the double equals if I'm being consistent here, right? Okay, so now we've talked about if and else, but there's also if else or else if, right? So we can try that in. So let's say if we said else if, we can compare. If I say, well, we'll take this problem away because there's no more problems, right? So it's not, if my name is not Tom, it's something else. So let's say else if, and I can put it on this line if I want, my name string, right, is exactly equal to Andrew, right? Let's say she's in the class. Then I can run another thing, console.log. You try this out too, guys. Hello, Andrew, right? Exclamation mark because she's a guest, right? And then else, I can even put an else in there saying console.log, .log, hello stranger, right? Hello stranger. So I don't know who you are, right? Oops. There we go. So right now it's Tom. I want to change this to Andrew right in here. And then let's, drop her age down to where it should be, like something like, 32, right? Andrew? 32, you like 32? Okay, there we go. And then, we're good like this. And if I run it right here, and if I just refresh the site here, it says, hey, Andrew app started. Andrew is 32. You are young and strong. And hello, Andrew, right? These are all good things. They passed all those tests, right? Questions around this about if statements and if else. These are, academic, kind of straightforward. If you've never done if or any conditionals before, this is how you do them. And I'm also showing you some nuances about JavaScript and how it fails. Remember the double equal, right? It's same thing with if you're doing things like not equal to. How do you do not equal? What? Exclamation equal, right? Well, that would fail for certain things. So you want to do exclamation double equal, right?
So that's like the triple equal.
Correct. Yeah. That's the triple not, right? So please be aware that those are different things that we use here. Okay, one more thing, and then we'll stop for the day. We're kind of behind, but it's okay. We'll catch up. So I have this stuff here, but I want to run a function. So let's make it so that I don't want to run any of this stuff here unless I call my function, right? Even this stuff here, my string, blah 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 blah, all this stuff, right? So first of all, what is a function? Well, a function encloses all of my executable lines of code, right? So first of all, there's a couple of ways to do this function stuff, and I'm just going to intro functions today, and we'll talk about it again next week, okay? So one way to do it is to create a name for the function. So var, my function, right, is equal to, and then we use the function keyword, function with quotation, like, open bracket, close bracket, and then your code block. And anything that's inside of there, and again, if I put all this stuff inside of there, so I take all this stuff and I cut it, and I put it inside here, and I paste it, right? And let's say, if by the way, if it looks ugly like this, in Visual Studio Code, you can right-click and say Format Code, and it'll nicely space everything around, right? Instead of you doing it for yourself. Okay, cool, so there it is, right? Well, what this is saying is, my function, right, this name, my function, belongs to this function object. Listen to my words. This function object that spans from this curly brace all the way up to this curly brace, from line 3 into line 29. Let's take some extra spaces away. So line 26, from line 3 to line 26, right? This is my function code block.
All your bars inside have local.
They're all local variables. They're not on the global namespace. All right. Now, what's going to happen now? Will this function execute? Why? I have.
One program within my function.
Right. I haven't called it. Right. And the way to call my function would be at the bottom somewhere, which is the right way to do it. You call my function, and then with kind of open bracket, close bracket. That calls. That's the function call syntax. Right. My function. All right, now let's see what happens. So any changes here? If I kind of refresh this site and go back to inspect, I can see that on the console, it's the same, right? And what about if I take away my function call? So I go back to my function call and just wipe this away. Or I comment it out. And in JavaScript, you can comment out things by pressing the double /. Other way of commenting, again, in C#, so double forward slash is one way, and the other way is I can use forward slash star, and then on different lines, star forward slash, and then that's a comment, right? So I've commented it out, right? And then let's see what happens. Notice it goes green, right? I go back to this, and let's see if I refresh. I get nothing, right? Because I haven't called my function. Well, here's something, and this is where I'll leave this, little tidbit with you, so it boils your brain when you're gone, right? Okay, let's try to check this out. Here's my index.html, right? I execute this code right here. This is the code. But what if in the body tag I add in an attribute called onload, and in onload I call my function, right? Like that. Will it execute now?
It'll execute.
When my body's finished loading, so my body's done loading, all the structure for my body's done, it's going to kick off that event handler, and it's going to use my function as a callback function. So my function will execute when my body, the stuff inside my body tags, this whole body element, when it finishes loading and rendering, then it's going to execute my function. That's what it does. Let's see if this works now. So save. And refresh. Now it's back, right? All the data is back again. Okay. One more, and I swear I'll let you go. All right. Okay, so let's take this away from here, this onload function. And I want to do something that's a little different. I'm going to show it to you. I'm not going to refer to it until way later in the course, but I'm going to show you there's another way to do it, which is really confusing to some. But I want to show it to you just in case you see it online, right? Just in case you're looking at file, code, whatever, right? So I've got my function, right? And I want it to execute automatically, right? How do I do that? Well, there's a structure that I'm going to show you, all right, called a self-executing anonymous function, right? I told you I'm going to boil your brain. I'll leave you with this one, right? Here's the structure around it. It looks like this. Open bracket. Follow me here. Function. So it's an anonymous function that has a code block, right? And at the end, we execute it automatically. That's the syntax. So inside my code block, right, anything that's in there is considered to be closed. All right? I can put some other function within my function, like this one. Remember I told you I was going to boil your brain, right? Come on. Okay, so here's your boiling of the brain, right? Put it inside there, and then I format the code. And now you have a function, closure, and inside the function you have another function, right? It's nested inside this function. And what this is doing, I'll tell you, what this is doing is this is considered a self-executing anonymous function, which means I don't have to call it. It calls itself.
You can't see it's a constant.
No. Here's what it looks like. So I don't have anything in my index.html. There's nothing in the body tag. And I'm not calling the function because, look, in my app.js, I'm not calling it, right? I'm not calling it still. I'm just, when I use this syntax down here, when I've copied it in, it automatically executes anything that's inside of here as if it's its own file. Let's try this out and see if it works. By the way, a little advanced, but I want to introduce it to you because you're going to see it out there and you're going to go, what the hell syntax is that JavaScript that Tom hasn't taught us? It's advanced, but it's going to work. Let's see.
You want to look backwards from seeing.
Didn't work because there's nothing calling it, huh?
How would you work if you knew that it was self-executing? How would you look backwards? So I guess
I'll show it to you after. But it didn't work because even here in my self-executing function, it's got a function within my self-executing function. So in order for me to make this work, if I call it out here, and I'm going to put it out here, right? Well, my function doesn't exist in this namespace because my function is inside that self-executing code, right? The only way that function is going to work is if this is in here, right? So we're talking about real namespacing, right? And then it's going to fire, it's going to trigger everything, and it'll work just fine.
so call the call inside.
So why? Because of this whole global namespacing issue, this global scope stuff, right? I have a global variable, and I'm going to use, remember, in advanced programming one day, I might have 1,000 JavaScript files, no doubt, seriously, right? And if I have 1,000 JavaScript files with different variable names, maybe the same variable name over and over again, they're going to trip on top of each other. They're going to rewrite over, the storage is going to write over itself. Because all we use is one indexed.html document to hold everything. The indexed.html document is almost like our little manifest that holds all the data, that executes everything in that one place. So in order for us to compartmentalize, we use something called an IIFE. And if I was going to tell you what it looks like, an IIFE, it's actually spelled like this, I-I-F-E, right? And what it is it's not life, it's I-I-F-E. It's an immediately invoked function expression is what it's called, right? Immediately invoked function expression. And if I look down here, it just says that. Immediately invoked function expression is a JavaScript function that runs as soon as it's defined, right? And you'll see this structure more and more as you get into programming. I'm introducing it to you now because you're going to see it later. Hey, let me ask you this question before you go. Is it pretty? No, it's darn ugly, man, right? It's an ugly way of looking at it, right? Ugly code. And that's what turns people off from JavaScript. They look at it and they go, I never want to do JavaScript again because it's the ugliest thing. It doesn't make any sense, and it's too loosely typed, and there's no control, and anything can happen, and it can break at any time, and it fails silently, and a bunch of bad things, right? But here's the good things about JavaScript. JavaScript is flexible, right? JavaScript can do stuff that no other language can do. Not Java, not C#, not Python, not any of the new modern languages, right? And that's why JavaScript can be very powerful. If in the hands of a JavaScript pro, you can come up with anything, like, for example, some games. And we made some games in other courses, and I'll show you one too. Check this out. Go to starbase12.heroku.com, right? This is one of the games that we came up with. I made this game. It took me about 2 weeks when it comes up. And I did it with pure JavaScript, right? So check this out. So I play. Stole the music. Right? Bit of an instruction screen. Go back, right? Play. Right? So all those things, I'm not going to go into too much into it. All those things you just saw there, all that graphics, is all the stuff that we can do with JavaScript, right? And we can do that with JavaScript by understanding how you compartmentalize. You're laughing, but how you compartmentalize everything, all your pieces, right? And by the way, there's only one index.html in this thing, and there's only a slight bit of CSS. Everything else is JavaScript. It's 100% JavaScript, and it's cross-browser. It'll work on any device. That's another really good thing about JavaScript, right? Any any platform, right? It takes a bit of time to get there, right? It's not something that I expect you to do in this course, right? But you have to get there. There's got to be some steps for how we get you there. And it's understanding the nuances of what's really, really good with JavaScript and what really sucks, right? And I can try and get you over the sucky part. I want you to not do the sucky stuff, right? Like use triple equals instead of double equals. Use strict all the time. These are things. Make sure you watch your variable names so they're contextual, so they make sense. So they're human readable. You look at them, I know what this is. Don't use I's and X's and Y's and Z's in your variable names. They make no sense. And if another programmer looks at them, they're going to go, wow, this other programmer sucked. He or she was terrible. I don't know what they're trying to do here, right? I'll leave you with that thought. Let's get back together next week, and we'll talk more in terms of the DOM. Online on Blackboard, you'll see that there is another PowerPoint for this week's teachings, right, that we didn't get to. It's called Accessing the DOM, and it talks about how to manipulate data content inside your HTML document. Okay?
Just want to ask you